From a U.S. Senate seat up for grabs to a governor who is term limited, Michigan has all the right ingredients to capture the attention of political pundits in 2026. That's why I sat down with Michigan Public Political Director and host of the It's Just Politics podcast, Zoe Clark. I do want to start with the U.S. Senate race because in the Democratic field, you have a lot of different experienced and established names running to fill Senator Gary Peters' seat. So do we have an idea of who's coming out strongest in terms of their lead in this race?
Yeah. It's a great question, Jaden. First, can I just sort of set the table for politics in Michigan right now to understand just how bonkers things are as a neighbor to the north? So, like next year, and I know we're going to get to this, but we have a governor's race, Secretary of State, Attorney General, the entire state house, the entire state senate, the entire congressional delegation. We're going to have likely a bunch of ballot proposals. And then surprisingly, this open US Senate race pops up. And so it's all led to sort of scrambling of like, is this person going to run for the open governor's race in 2026? Maybe they'll run for the Senate. So to your question, though, starting with Senate, yeah, we have a number of interesting and I would say quite strong candidates on the Democratic side. We have Representative Haley Stevens. We have State Senator Mallory McMurrow. We have Abdul El Sayed, who actually ran for governor in 2018. He lost, of course, the Democratic primary to now current governor, Gretchen Whitmer. And then we have State Representative Joe Tate. And some numbers just have started to leak out. Well, I shouldn't say leak out because some of the candidates just like tweeted and all the socials. And actually, interestingly enough, State Senator Mallory McMurrow just sort of blew the other candidates out of the water when it comes to money raised. And so it's going to be really interesting just to see kind of and watching the money game that happens on the Democratic side.
And that's a great segue to my next question because I was curious about that. I mean, we have fresh fundraising data expected to be coming out in the coming days. What is the data that we currently have out suggesting about which candidates are closest in terms of fundraising?
Yeah, I mean, I should say when I said blow out of the water, like, fundamentally, it's all between right now about like, 1.5 and $2.5 million. So, I mean, we're not talking about, huge schisms of tens of millions of dollars. But I think what's so interesting, right, is that Mallory McMorrow, again, a state senator, came out first with this big number. And then Haley Stevens, the U.S. rep, right, who I think many considered, I don't know if I would say the front runner, but just sort of like financially established, right? Because she's in DC, comes out with a lesser amount. Now, what she did was she took some funds from her US House campaign and moved them over, right? So it's sort of hard to do an apples to apples comparison. It's a little bit maybe more apples to oranges. But I think it was a pretty strong indication from Mallory McMurrow of her fundraising prowess, which we have seen over the past few years after, and I know you have covered this before and talked about this before, this sort of viral floor speech that she gave on the state Senate after she was accused by a fellow state senator, but a Republican, about grooming children, basically. And so she just gave this fiery response. National media picked it up. She was all over MSNBC. Then, of course, Mallory McMurrow got to deliver the speech at the Democratic National Convention over the summer. Maybe folks who are watching remember she was actually the one who was holding that really big Project 2025 book, and so she's gained some name recognition, and we've really seen her be able to fundraise. But, Abdul El Sayed also coming out with some serious cash, and he's also got some really interesting endorsements, including from U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders. So it's a fascinating Democratic primary right now in Michigan for this open U.S. Senate seat.
And that example you just provided of the big Project 2025 book, that was a big part of messaging in 2024 for national Democrats. But interestingly enough, it's those messaging choices and then those policy stances that will be key to coming out on top in this Democratic primary for the U.S. Senate in Michigan. I know we've seen national Democrats here in 2025. They've really galvanized the base by kind of positioning themselves as an opposition to the Trump administration. Could that still work in a state like Michigan, which is a purple state?
Yes, it will absolutely. First of all, fabulous question. It will absolutely work in the Democratic primary. right? In fact, this is what we know about American politics, right? Is that in the primary, folks tend to need to lean either to the left if it's a Democratic primary, or lean to the right if it's a Republican primary, in order to get the what we call the base votes.
Right.
And then, of course, you win and you're in the general, and then you've got to moderate again, particularly in Michigan, where there's a large number of independent and moderate and centrist voters, because, as you say, we are a purple state. And so, we will see what these candidates do, but my gut says it's going to be a lot about sort of running against Donald Trump in the primary. But again, as you well know, Trump won this state this past November. He also won it in 2016. And so how do you then come back to the general and get some of those moderate and independent voters? This is the politics of Michigan.
And I do want to switch gears to the Republican Senate primary as well, because there's also a lot to talk about there. I mean, you have Republican Congressman, former Congressman Mike Rogers. He's running for U.S. Senate again after unsuccessfully running for U.S. Senate in 2024. Obviously, he lost that election to Senator Alyssa Slotkin, who's holding that position now. Based on your reporting, what's given him the confidence that he can turn things around this time around?
It's a great question. What has given him the confidence? I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about that because, really, he sort of, I mean, it was not a great time for him in November. Like, he didn't just lose in November, but Donald Trump won, right? So the Republican at the top of the ticket won, and fewer people then just decided to vote for Mike Rogers, or some actually maybe voted for Trump, the Republican, and then Alyssa Slotkin, the Democrat. Exactly. So, I mean, to your point of what is giving him life and the belief that he can run again, I don't know, ego, political ego. And I mean, look, and I don't say that dismissively. I mean, this is what politicians have to have, right? If they think that you can go and say, elect me to whatever seat, I mean, politicians have some level of ego. But, I think if I'm a campaign manager, I'm thinking, okay, well, this was a nationalized race in November, so people know my name, right? Like, his name ID is high up there because he just ran. And he also, and this is sort of the, inside politics of which, Jaden, I know you also love to talk about, is that he has hired actually some Trump former campaign officials to help run his campaign here coming up in 26. So, I mean, I think those are things that give him hope. But I mean, and also we should note that he was a member of Congress representing Michigan for many years in the congressional district that Alyssa Slotkin then won after he retired. So, but what gives him that? I think it's a sense of like, hey, let's give it another shot, right?
Yeah, and you actually provided an example of how behind the scenes he's really leaning into the Trump agenda, the Trump effect, I should say. But now you're starting to see publicly too, and this has really kind of been his politics for a while. I mean, he leans into the Trump brand. And so in this state like Michigan, where you have a lot of middle of the road voters, is that something that could count against him?
It's a great question. And again, the dynamics are such that, again, I want to remind folks, like, Donald Trump won Michigan, right, statewide. And then a Democratic Senator, Alyssa Slotkin, ran statewide, right? And Mike Rogers ran under the umbrella of Donald Trump. That's even though we should note that Mike Rogers distanced himself from Trump after the 2020 election. And so, it's been sort of this like, distancing and then coming back and then distancing and then coming back. And so I think, he will continue again under the proviso of hiring, some Trump campaign officials to try to keep that closeness among Trump voters. But as we were talking about a few minutes ago, what do you then do in a general election to get back to that moderate middle? And some of that, again, will be dependent on who that Democratic candidate is that he would possibly be running against in the November general.
When you set the table for 2026, you also mentioned the gubernatorial election. And so it's definitely important that we touch on that because you also have this field of established Democrats running for Governor Gretchen Whitmer's job as she's term limited. And so, based on the messaging of these candidates, are they running on this change agenda or are they doing a continuation of the Whitmer administration?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's just note like first, her lieutenant governor,
Right,
Garland Gilchrist, is running. So if there was anyone out of any of the candidates to sort of take on the mantle of, sort of the Whitmer agenda, right? I mean, it just is him because he's been lieutenant governor. But
right.
what's really interesting is, when you talk to him about differences that he sees, right? Because of course that's what you're going to ask as a political journalist is,
Yeah.
what do you differ with your principal on? He hasn't come out and said, anything negative towards Whitmer, but one of the things I really latched onto in one of his answers was talking about that he's younger and technology and AI. He has a background in that, but it was really interesting that that sort of seemed to be what he was going to put a little bit of a splinter between, saying, I'm of this next sort of generational leadership change, which we've seen on the national level has been such a big topic of conversation in national politics, ever since, Joe Biden's age became such a topical issue in the last presidential cycle.
Yeah, we saw Kamala Harris in a similar position as the lieutenant governor is in right now, where you want to create some distance, but you don't want to do it in a way that feels like a betrayal. And so it's a
Right.
difficult position to be in politically. But I do wonder, do you think Governor Whitmer is going to inject herself in this primary by way of an endorsement?
Yeah, it's and that's what I was going to say is it's very clear no that she is going I think to stay hands off until the primary election and then she will full-throated endorse whichever Democrat that is, and that is because her lieutenant governor Garland Gilchrist is running, but so is the state's Democratic Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. We also have Sheriff Chris Swanson. He is the sheriff of Genesee County. And then in the mix of all of this that we haven't even discussed yet, of course, and you know where I'm going with this, is independent candidate Mike Duggan, right? The mayor of Detroit, a longtime Democrat, now saying, no, I'm running as an independent for governor. And so that just adds this whole other dynamic into the race. And so, no, I think Gretchen Whitmer does not want to get her hands dirty in making any kind of endorsement or putting her thumb on the scale, but you will see her after the primary, work her tail off for the Democratic candidate.
And in our political culture, it really comes to be in a referendum on a previous party every election. Governor Whitmer's name may not be on the ballot, but Democrats, people who are of her same party, will be. And so, how effective has the governor been in executing her agenda, and how will that play into voters' decisions?
It's a great question. Well, and let's go back to your point, just to add a little history here, which it has been decades and decades and decades and decades, I kid you not, before both you and I, Jaden, were born, that Michigan has voted for a governor of the same party back to back. Right. So if you're just looking at that, you would say, okay, Michigan modern political history says we are going to choose a Republican. But again, all bets are off because we just continue in both Michigan and national politics continue to see change election after change election. Now back to your, also question about how she's done on her agenda. I can tell you she is politically above water here in Michigan, meaning that her approval ratings continue to be above 50%, which is a big deal for a second term governor, particularly when you look at the approval ratings of Rick Snyder when he left, our last second term governor, and then even Jennifer Granholm, a Democrat, before that. So she's doing well when it comes to sort of political popularity among voters. But right now on her agenda is fixing the damn roads. This is what you laugh, right? Because this is what she ran on in
Very consistent
2018.
message.
Yes, right. And the fact is, though, she hasn't been able to come up with a deal yet with the legislature to fix the damn roads. In fact, this is just what our podcast this week, It's Just Politics, was about, was this inability between the legislature and the governor to really figure out this marquee thing that she wants to do. And so I think that is going to be a big focus, right, in the next year plus in her legacy.
And you have this Republican field that's very similar to the Democratic field in that there's a lot of experience and a lot of familiar names there. And
Yeah.
so, do we have any polling data or just anecdotal evidence to suggest that there is a front runner there?
It's such a great question, and I want to be really careful about naming a front runner so early on.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you is let's talk about name ID. And there was some polling that came out in May from Richard Schuba at the Glengarriff firm that showed that John James, who is a Republican congressman, who is also sort of like Mike Rogers, right, who's running for the Senate, has run multiple times for multiple offices, finally won a Republican congressional district and has announced that he is running for governor. So back in May, and this was before all of the current candidates had even announced, his name recognition was high. But to your point, I mean, we have Mike Cox, who is a former attorney general, Republican attorney general, who has won statewide before. We have Tom Leonard, Republican former Speaker of the House. We have the current Senate Minority Leader, State Senate Minority Leader, Eric Nesbitt. We have a candidate named Anthony Hudson who has run in races before. So this one is just going to be fascinating to watch. I mean, it is quite the GOP primary.
You just mentioned Representative John James. Obviously, he's really become synonymous with just the Trump era for the GOP, and he's really embedded himself in that. I'm just curious, after those previous unsuccessful Senate runs, are his ambitions at the state level? Are those more within reach?
It's a great question. I mean, so to your point, right, like he has lost statewide twice before when he has run for US Senate. Now he is running, of course, statewide, but for the governor's office. He has not gotten the Trump endorsement yet. All of these candidates want the Trump endorsement. As we were talking about earlier, to get through a Republican primary, in modern politics right now, whether it's in Michigan or statewide, the Trump endorsement seems to help in primaries. So they all want it, but John James, I think, thought that perhaps he would be the front runner for it. But Donald Trump has not given his approval yet, and in fact, interestingly enough, a few weeks ago, they were at a bill signing ceremony. So President Trump is signing this bill, and John James was part of getting this bill through. And Donald Trump calls him out and kind of throws him under the bus, Jaden. He goes, John James, is John James here? Yeah, John James, you decided to run for the governor instead of staying in the House. We're not so sure about that, John James. Do you have a good Republican
Wow.
candidate who's going to back you up? Because right Donald Trump wants as many Republicans in competitive districts in which John James is to stay in the Republican seat. And so there's been some reporting both nationally and statewide that Donald Trump and that JD Vance are not happy that John James decided to make this run for governor, that they wanted him to stay in this competitive House seat with the likelihood that they would have a better chance of keeping it red in 2026. So this is one, that we're all just watching. And we still haven't seen a Republican front runner decide to jump into that congressional race to sort of back up John James and say, okay, I've got this. You go work on the governor's race and get that Trump endorsement.
And that's certainly the larger context here, which is that what happens in Michigan could be very crucial to both parties' success in terms of keeping a chamber or lose a chamber. So there's a potential of either happening. And so Michigan is a part of that larger equation. There's a lot of math involved. So certainly I can understand those debates behind closed doors. I do wonder, are they running on state issues or are they aligning themselves with those national issues? Because Ohio, for example, you see a lot of the candidates here, it's always the national issues. So are they kind of riding the wave of fixing the damn roads and maybe using that as an argument of saying the roads haven't been fixed, thus elect me? Is that what's happening?
So it's a great question. And it's one I've been thinking a lot about over the years as politics and political elections have become so nationalized, right? I mean, ever since, Donald Trump came on the scene, in 2015, sort of no matter who's on the ballot, it feels like it's sort of a referendum on Trump or, Trump's policies. So you cannot take Trump out of the equation in 2026, even though he will not be on the ballot. But one of the real threads that we have seen here in Michigan, and that I'm really grabbing onto and want to do a lot more conversations about, is the governor's race. Aside from referendum on Trump and nationalized, I think one of the most statewide local issues is going to be about education. That Michigan's education scores have really plummeted over the years. Now, particularly the COVID years, right? And look, like we've seen that in many respects in many states. We know students just had drastically hard times, working on computers during years of COVID. But both Republican and Democratic candidates are talking about sort of the drop in rate. So it's not just like, that we're not doing great. It's like we're not as high as we used to be. And so they're talking about putting out education proposals. Mike Duggan did that actually at a big state conference back in May. He put out a really big education proposal about how much money he wants to see put into education. Jocelyn Benson has started to put out some statements as well. And when I interviewed, I've talked to all the gubernatorial candidates, and when we talked with Eric Nesbitt, the state senator, he is also just sort of laser focused on education. And so I think that is going to become an issue that is really top of mind, and is talked a lot about leading up to 2026.
And I think it's good that that conversation is happening.
Yeah.
I do wonder, in terms of the future, we are very far out from 2026. So it's going to be a while before we get to the point where things really start to heat up. But in the meantime, are there any other spoilers that you're maybe watching for?
It's a great question. And actually, had we recorded this 48 hours earlier, I might have said one Tudor Dixon, who is a Republican candidate for governor in 2022, right? So she won the Republican primary. She got the Trump endorsement. And then she lost to Governor Gretchen Whitmer in 22 by a really large amount for Michigan politics, like nearly 11 points she lost by. I mean, that's just a huge spread. And so there was some conversation about whether Tudor Dixon would jump in to, again, either the governor's race or the U.S. Senate race. And she literally just announced that she is not going to run for both. So that would have been someone that I would have said we were all watching, but she's made this announcement. On the Republican side for U.S. Senate, Mike Cox is really he's the one who's running right now. And so we're all waiting to see what Republican Representative Bill Huizenga does, if he decides to get into this primary race as well. But I mean, Jaden, the real just shocker where all of the political journalists, chins were on the floor getting the popcorn ready was, months ago when Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan announced that he was running for an independent. I mean, we all knew that he was going to run for governor. I mean, that was sort of an open secret. But running as an independent was shocking.
When you see the political polarization, you're really seeing independent candidates start to have more of a shot, given that there's just been that divide in the country where folks are trying to find a middle, and he may represent that. And so that's something to watch for, I think.
It is. I mean, he is doing basically a plague on both their houses, right? He's going, blue has let you down, red has let you down, and he's trying to find that sweet spot in the middle. And Jaden, it is just going to be fascinating to watch.
See, and when you think about it, we have so many months left for more surprises. I mean, we're just
right. That's
started.
the thing. Like, oh my gosh. I mean, we're sitting here, talking in July. There's still a year and a month to go before there's even these primaries.
Jeez. Wow. I know it's going to be a long time. Michigan Public Political Director and host of the It's Just Politics podcast, Zoe Clark. Thanks for chatting with me.
Oh my gosh, Jaden, it has been such a pleasure. I will talk politics with you any day of the week.